Good morning, everybody. It is Cade with Go Wellness, and we are extremely excited to have you on the webinar today. So today we're going to be talking about gut health and some effective solutions there. So you guys are in for a treat. I think a lot of it is how you communicate it to patients, and so when Regan goes through this, understanding how to communicate things better to patients, how to move them forward with different more effective processes in their treatments. This is going to be huge for you. So buckle up and get ready to rock. Some things before we jump into the webinar. I want to make sure everybody knows what's going on over the summer. So we have a couple events coming up in just a couple weeks. We're going to be in Salt Lake City at the Impact Hub. That's going to be a stem cell event where we're going to go through all the stages of implementation and all the protocols on how to do different injections. And so you can get a level 1 certification on stem cell therapy implementation for practitioners, and then your staff can get trained on the other end. So if you haven't had a chance to get registered for that and you're interested in jumping on board with that, shoot us an email at info@gowellness.com or watch for an email. There'll be a registration, a link where you can sign up and purchase that seat. We have a couple seats left. It's getting close to the deadlines, and so I might encourage you to reach out to us as soon as possible if that's something that you're interested in. And then for our traditional seminars with the Healthcare Entrepreneur and Functional Medicine program, session 2 is Thinking Like Elon Musk to Transform Healthcare in America. That's coming up in LA, July 15th and 16th. It's going to be an amazing event. We did change the venue, so for all you clients that have been going to our events, please make sure you notated the email I just sent out I think it was yesterday. I sent out the updated address. It's at the Renaissance Hotel right near LAX. We got a block of rooms. They're only available till June 16th at that block rate, so make sure you call and get your room reserved. If you're a guest, not a current client, give us a call. We have a lot of first-timer discounts and things that you can come learn from us right one-on-one live and see if it's a good fit. And obviously we want to vet you a little bit before you come to that as well. So reach out to us and we'll go through all the specifics there. So let's jump back to the webinar. So Regan's going to be covering a lot on the microbiome and having good gut health and some different protocols there. So sit back, relax. No, don't relax. Be taking notes like a mad woman or man right now. And get ready to learn some good stuff and get some questions ready. I want to see a couple questions today, otherwise you're all kicked off the webinar. I didn't see any complaints there, so I guess everyone's planning on asking a lot of questions today. All right, sorry, I'm teasing everybody. So without further ado, I give you Regan Archibald.
Woo! Yeah, thanks, Kate. Appreciate it. All of you, appreciate you making time in your morning to be with us on this webinar. It's interesting. We talk a lot about multiple subjects, a variety of them, and I've been getting a few more questions about gut health and how to implement that into practice, and so I'm going to go through some of the foundational pieces that you want to look at. First of all, in the gut, I think this should be the foundational cornerstone of any practice, is get the gut fixed. I mean, if you look at the amount of research that's come out in the last 5 years on the microbiome, it's just phenomenal. There's nothing in my mind that supersedes fixing the gut. I mean, you look at Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, you look at Greek medicine, healing starts with the gut. Hippocrates said early on, let thy food be thy medicine and thy medicine be thy food. And the food is not only are you feeding yourself, but you're also feeding these little critters in your body. So the next time that you go to make a meal for yourself, maybe you'll think about your bacteria just a little bit more, because there's a lot of phenomenal things out there that can really help get things fast flowed for you. So as we jump in, I'd like to hear from you guys about how many of you are running stool profiles. What's the largest barrier that you're running into when you run the test? I know when I first ran the test, I was like, holy shit, this is like a foreign language. I had no idea what it means. The other thing I found is, like, how do I put protocols around this? Because, first of all, I had no idea what it meant, and second of all, it was, there's just like, what do I do with this information? And so, if you guys, can just type in questions, Cade will receive those as they come, and then he can communicate those to me, or I'll pause and answer your question directly. But we've seen a dramatic improvement in our ability to treat gut health because I actually took the time to research it, attending seminars and understanding the body. So today my goal is to give you a nice overview. Again, many of you have heard me talk about this. Today we're just going to once again touch on what could be one of the most valuable treatment areas of your practice, which is gut health. And I don't care if you're just doing nutrition, acupuncture, stem cells, chiropractic adjustments. If you start adding in the microbiome, what you're going to see is a dramatic patient improvement. But one of the reasons it is so complex is because in your stomach alone, you've got 25 different species. And we all know the H. pylori that causes a lot of the acid reflux symptoms. H. pylori we think is bad, but it's actually something it's necessary to have some of it there. But H. pylori can be one of those things that causes an ulcer. If you look at the 500 to 1,000 species in the intestines, you've got the lactobacillus, the E. coli, the bacteroides, you've got the firmicute, the C. diff can show up there and be very pathogenic, and we'll go through some of those. You've got over 600 species in your mouth, your pharynx, and respiratory system. Candida can harbor in your respiratory system. If you don't believe me, try and drink a soda and then go for a run and watch how wheezy you get. Candida will just start flourishing very quickly in the lungs and in the sinuses. That's where a lot of the antibiotics that we use to treat sinus infections, they don't work, because the majority of the cases, there's a bacterial overgrowth, and maybe it will take care of that bacterial infection, but the infection's still there because it's caused by yeast in the sinuses. You've got over 1,000 species in the skin, over 60 species in your urogenital tract. So if you look at this overall, we've got more genetic sequences. Genetically we're more bacteria than we are humans. It's 10 to 1. So if you look at it in your intestines, you've got about 300 trillion bacterial species, about 3.5 pounds. If you took your brain out of your head, it's going to weigh about the same, which is really interesting to me. Then you've got about 100 trillion species on your skin. So the massive antibacterial movement that we've all been exposed to, is killing off these species, because part of what our gut does is it synthesizes vitamins, it synthesizes short-chain fatty acids, it metabolizes xenobiotics and toxins, it prevents colonization by pathogens, it stimulates a normal immune system maturation. So if you think about it, when you are sitting down with your patient, you just ran the lab, you've got this diagnostics foreign-looking lab in front of you, you've ran it through your coach, you've met with Dr. Taylor or Dan Kelms, and you've asked them for their insights, how to build a protocol around it, or you've reached out to the lab itself, and now okay, they've got they've got some of the classic markers of leaky gut. It looks like they've got some Klebsiella overgrowth, and the very first thing you're going to do when you sit down with your patient, step one, is always explaining what the gut does, what it is, how it performs. And we've created different videos to pre-educate your patients before you do lab reviews with them. And we found that to be very helpful. Kate, are those videos on Kajabi currently?
For each of the lab reviews, I don't think they are. I'll make sure to get those updated. Hey, we have a couple questions that just came in from Nam.
Okay.
Did you see? Can you see those at all? So we have after finding dysbiosis, what is your favorite probiotics? Soil-based or just 50 billion or 3 trillion? Somebody to choose from. Let's see.
Yay.
Yeah. So you see those questions that she wrote?
I can. I try not to look at them because it distracts me, and if I'm always looking at them, so thanks for stopping, but I can see them now. So now it actually really depends on what probiotic we use is based on what type of infection is showing up. But in like a good general probiotic that we really like that's broad spectrum is Prescript Assist. I don't know if you're using that. And then we also use probiotics that are from Metagenics. Metagenics makes some very specific formulas that we seem to like. Some are soil-based, definitely some aren't, because certain probiotics can actually cause a histamine reaction in people. Can you show us at the end of the lecture the specific protocol with antimicrobial, anti-candida, antifungal? Absolutely. And okay, NAM uses the BioHealth 401. I have not used that. You also use Prescript Assist. Great. Yeah, the thing, I think one of the reasons why we've stuck to Metagenics is because their protocols, their organisms essentially have been tested and verified to have the quantities that they say. They have a specific bacterial species for particular conditions, which I love. But honestly, I love those, but I find that if you get your patients on fermented foods on a regular basis, then it negates the need for probiotics, for the most part. I still feel better when I take Prescript Assist, so I tend to do that on a pretty regular basis because it's so diverse. But for those of you who are using probiotics, it's great because your patients typically are not getting near the amount of bacteria that they need. Metagenics has a specific capsule that allows your probiotics to actually pass through the hydrochloric acid in your stomach for the most part, so that it actually gets in your colon. But in some of your patients, the probiotics, you have to actually use it, introduce it through an enema. And I don't know if any of you have recommended that to your patients, but it's really difficult to get the probiotics where they need to be and to actually start populating. So it's just like fecal matter transplant, which, at the Elon Musk event, we're going to be doing fecal matter transplants with Cade. So I don't think
It's
he's
going to be awesome. It's
you
epic.
can't wait. But with fecal matter transplant, you've got to, introduce the fecal matter through an enema, and then you have to hold it ideally for about 45 minutes or 50 minutes up to an hour. And the person's just going to keep switching from one side to the next side. It's the same with probiotics. It's not quite as dramatic, but you want to hold it in for about 30 minutes, and you do want to have your patient move from side to side so that they can get more inoculation from the areas of their system. So, for example, Nam, if they had a diagnosed text that showed that they had scant growth in both gram-negative and gram-positive rods, and they've got autoimmunity, they're not digesting or absorbing any nutrition, that's a person that I would recommend, get some probiotic and introduce it to enema, and that's saved some of our patients' lives. The patients who just can't thrive, they're losing weight, they're weak. It's one of the best ways you can introduce it. Some of the bacteria that you really want to look out for are the Campylobacter, and the Enterococcus, and then of course the C. diff. C. diff is one of those tough ones to treat, and the only infection that you can use fecal matter transplant for right now, according to the FDA, the only thing that I know of that's approved is treatment for C. diff, and it's got to be a genetically matching donor. We have treated several patients with C. diff. Our success rate is about 50% when they don't do the fecal matter transplant. You know, about half the patients that we treat, we can actually get rid of it, we can eradicate it, we retest it, it's gone. But the patients who do the absolute best are the ones who are open to doing a fecal matter transplant. And there's actually a GI doctor up the street from us who does the fecal matter transplant. It costs about $600 for the entire treatment. I think that's two cycles of it. So it's, you know, it's not bad considering the expense of having C. diff itself. Enterococcus facialis is a common cause of post-surgical infections. I've seen that show up in patients who have had dental work done. And that seems to show up pretty often. So, you know, watch out for that. Or if your patients have constant mouth infections, if they've got a lot of dental issues, a lot of cavities, gingivitis, they're constantly getting this slow leakage of an infection in their gut all the time. So you really want to look out for that. Campylobacter, the Campylobacter are most commonly associated with diseases. It occurs through contaminated food. And then some of the good bacteria, you know, the E. coli, there's several types in the human gut, but the E. coli is involved in the production of vitamin K2. So if you want to have good blood clotting, obviously your leafy greens, especially your kale, your chard, your collard greens, mustard greens, are really going to feed this family. They help keep the bad bacteria in check. Some strains of E. coli, of course, can lead to infection. E. coli, this bacteria, when it gets into your bladder, it's the #1 cause of UTI. If you look at lactobacilli, this is the most common bacterial family or species that actually helps you produce vitamins and nutrients. It boosts immunity. It protects against carcinogens. The interesting thing is, you and I, we could eat the same exact food, and let's say we ate a meal, we sat down and we ate a 500-calorie meal, and it had you know, micronutrients, vitamins, minerals. Your bacteria may actually increase that meal so that it's a 600-calorie meal. Your bacteria may be so efficient at metabolizing those minerals and nutrients that you actually get more calories out of the food than I would get. Your bacteria can also influence the amount of micronutrients that you're absorbing. So you may get more vitamin K out of kale than I would, for example, if you had more E. coli, or you may get more B vitamin synthesis because of your lactobacilli. So when you're looking at the cultures and the species, when we see a scant growth, or when we see you know, diminished amounts, if you're looking at a Genova lab, when you see diminished amounts in certain species, the biggest risk is, yeah, you've got a lack of diversity, which means you're going to be more prone to chronic disease. But the other big risk is you're not getting the nutrients that you need, even if you're eating them. And so that's where vitamin IVs, that's where we use vitamin IVs in our patients who show up showing very low growth or diversity in their gut, or scant or no growth. In the bifidobacteria, these bacteria regulate the levels of bacteria in the gut. They're kind of like the police officers. They modulate the immune responses to invading pathogens. They prevent tumor formations. Once again, they produce vitamins as well. Good healthy gut, it ferments indigestible carbohydrates. So when you eat the fibrous vegetables, or when you're eating the resistant starch, your bacteria love that stuff. Even if you look at it right out of the gates when we're born, the very first bacteria culture or species that we are inoculated with is a little bit of Lactobacillus johnsonii, and that is when we swallow a little bit of our mother's fecal matter, and if we're born vaginally, obviously. We're also, our skin gets coated with lots of healthy, great bacteria from the birth canal as well. And then what happens is when we breastfeed, it's the oligosaccharides that are basically resistant starch. They're starches that are found in breast milk, and the bacteria just go crazy. Our bacteria love those. So it's this beautiful process. And then the older we get, the more diversity that starts to set in. A child has a very low diversity in their intestines. I mean, their intestines have some bacteria, but it's pretty much, well, they used to call it a sterile environment, but we found now that it's not 100% sterile. There's still bacteria in there, but this inoculation and population starts with the breastfeeding. And obviously, if you're not breastfeeding, it becomes very difficult. If you're born C-section, you're not breastfed, and you know, especially if you're premature. Kate and I have some members of our family that, you know, they were born prematurely, and thank God that they're alive, because they were like a pound. I mean, they were tiny, a pound and a half. But their digestive systems took so long to develop because, you know, they couldn't breastfeed. They were born with C-section, and you know, you can really start to see that population and diversity is not there, and so it's not until we're older in life that we actually have enough diversity. And so that's why what we're feeding our kids these days, unfortunately, when we're feeding them processed foods, they're going through the drive-through at McDonald's, and not only are they getting garbage food full of you know, gluten and sugar and processed chemicals, but they're also getting a healthy dose of glyphosate, because most of the grains and cattle that they actually make hamburgers out of, and soy that they use as a filler in those burgers, actually contain a lot of glyphosate. And glyphosate's like a broad spectrum antibiotic, so it's killing off a lot of the good healthy flora. And the particular people in our family, the frustrating thing is these kids, they are very picky in what they eat, and they're eating the foods that exactly the wrong thing that their body needs. And you know, Kate and I have to be cool about it, and not say anything, but at the same time, it's like, man, their body needs it more than anything, because if you don't have a good population, you cannot ferment these indigestible carbohydrates. The fibrous stuff will not get broken down. Your bacteria won't have anything to feed on. That will limit the production of vitamins, because it's also, when you have a limitation in the number of vitamins, then we all know that then the hormones start to go out of balance, and then blood chemistry comes off, and then we really start to see some autoimmune system breakouts. So if you look at a condition like IBS, so many of you are treating patients with IBS. Kay, do we have any questions yet? Just want to make sure everybody...
We had a question on Metagenics, probiotics. I kind of took that over. It's just the Ultra Flora line is what you were talking about, right? The Metagenics,
yeah,
probiotics.
We use men's balance, women's balance, the children's, and then, yeah, the Ultra Flora. They have one specifically for IBS. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so let's jump into IBS. A lot of our patients come in with IBS. I know I could be diagnosed with IBS if I ate really crappy food all the time. It would be very simple, because my body is super sensitive to foods based on my history. But if you look at IBS, so ultimately what are the causative factors? Well, one of the things that you look at in IBS is there's going to be environmental factors. So there can be bacterial overgrowth, there can be parasites, you can have yeast that can trigger some intestinal flare-ups. If you look at IBS, most of our patients who have been diagnosed with it, and I find it interesting because IBS is, you know, it's a real thing. but the way that it gets diagnosed is often just what are your, um, I've got symptoms of my stools will go loose or they'll be diagnosed. But one of the ways that you can diagnose it is looking at a complete blood count to see if there's anemia or any other abnormalities. Then you can get a colonoscopy going. That's kind of the typical route that you'll take. But unfortunately, there's no doctors who are actually like, well, let's actually do a stool sample to see what's going on here, because IBS it's a functional issue with your gastrointestinal system, and it's actually become more common than diabetes. It's kind of like the unheard of disease is IBS. I remember I did a couple of dinner lectures on IBS because it's so prolific in our society, but nobody's talking about it. Um, but it really can be incredibly it can affect people's life because it can be debilitating, because if you want to go on a hike and you need to know where a bathroom is. I have a patient who had IBS when she first started coming to see us, and she's like, you know what, I had to map out where a bathroom was. She drove about an hour to find us, and she had to map out where all the bathrooms were just in case she needed to pull over real quick, which, is crazy. So IBS, the causative factors, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different things from more of a functional medicine perspective, but the other thing you want to look at is look at the emotions with a person. The symptoms, IBS has been around. It was about 1978 when we first discovered IBS and started talking about it more. And then over the past several decades, kind of the diagnostic patterns for IBS is it's a little more subjective, and it's become a lot more refined. So, all right, so barrier integrity. We're going to talk about leaky gut some today, because leaky gut can be one of the other causative factors of IBS. Digestive enzymes. If a person's not producing enough digestive enzymes, then what systems do you have to think about? Well, that's where you need to think about, your liver. Is your pancreas, how's your pancreatic enzyme output, and look on the labs once again. Do they have food sensitivities, dairy and gluten? I told you I could induce IBS if I ate a certain way for a couple of weeks, and dairy, gluten, and sugar would be kind of the main things that I could do that with. Are there already autoimmune conditions? Because ultimately IBS is inflammation at its root, and so what's causing it? And is there another autoimmune condition that is triggering that? And then hormonal dysregulation. If they don't have proper thyroid function, for example, then the thyroid hormone's not going to be there to secrete and trigger peristalsis. So they could end up very constipated, and then diarrhea. And then do they have inflammation? What are their inflammatory markers for C-reactive protein? Looking at any types of homocysteine elevation, those can be pretty typical things. So some of the diagnostic criteria is with IBS, it's got to be pain, abdominal pain. That's got to be at least 1 day per week for the last 3 months. It's got to be associated to defecation. It's also can be a change of frequency of stool. So somebody can be diagnosed with IBS if their stool is, their stools are normal, then all of a sudden they get constipated and they're going every 3 days, and they have abdominal pain with it. And then it can also be, the other criteria is a change of stool appearance. So their stool, once again, it can be, the color can change, the texture can change. All those things can be criteria for it. Some of the red flags, the big alarms that you want to look out for, is if there's any anemia, any abnormal blood tests, because that can indicate that there could be cancer. And don't mess around with that. If you run your diagnostics tests or Genova or whatever labs you're running, and you find that there's blood in the stool, unless the person's like, yeah, I had hemorrhoids, it could have shown up there, or I just had a colonoscopy and maybe it's blood from that. But if you do find blood in the stool, in the the culture itself, then you definitely need to refer them out. It's not smart to hang on to them. I mean, I don't like colonoscopies just as much as you don't. I think they're very damaging and not always indicative of, well, they aren't at all indicative of what's going on functionally with the bacteria in the gut, but they also cause a lot of problems with perforations, and then rarely do they clean the camera in the right way, so they're basically forming all this pathogenic bacteria gets nicely inoculated right into your colon. So but if there's blood in the stool, you got to rule out cancer in all cases. Colon cancer, I believe, is the third most common cancer right now in the United States, and it's hitting people in their 30s. I mean, very young people. And so catch it early. Some of the other red flags, fever, nighttime symptoms, recent use of antibiotics, family history of IBS, celiac, colon cancer. A lot of our patients who have like fibromyalgia, headaches, they tend to have more, they're more prone to IBS. Depression, anxiety, that should not be surprising to you, are more prone to having IBS. And so, the testing, you can do your blood test, you can do your stool test, looking for any bacterial infections, intestinal parasites. Those, like I mentioned earlier, any yeast overgrowth, that can be some of the causative factors. The colonoscopy or a sigmoidoscopy, those give you a visual perspective of what's going on in the gut, in the colon. There's also the barium enema. You can use that and do an x-ray and see if there's any structural imbalance there. Then once again you go back to, all right, let's look at all the other markers in the hormones, autoimmune markers, food sensitivities, all those. So IBS is a big thing. At the core, the very first place you want to start, step one, is, do they have leaky gut? Because leaky gut is one of the, leaky gut is not the ideal word you want to use. You want to use intestinal permeability. But really, this is the foundation of IBS or any diseases in the colon at all. And as we've learned, there's so much going on in the colon with these species. I mean, they're very busy. The bacteria in our body are probably, they influence us a lot more than we know right now, because if you look at the mitochondria, now researchers have actually been able to discover that the mitochondria are just evolved bacteria species that became smaller versions of themselves so that they could be inside the cell. And the bacteria are constantly in communication with the mitochondria. So if you look at that, the bacteria in our body is so so diverse and active in what it does and how we feel and our food cravings, the way our bodies heal. And so leaky gut seems to be one of the big environmental changers. So I look at leaky gut as the same way I'd look at like a toxic environment where you've got like a gas station on a corner, underneath that gas station is all this pollution. And so if you have enough pockets of polluted environment, then pretty soon nothing can live there. I mean, you think of the BP oil spill, I think that was in 2012. Man, I mean, they're still cleaning up that mess, and there was dead fish, birds were dying, so many things were dying when it came to that. And so, I look at leaky gut in the same way. So first of all, what happens? There's triggers that are going to cause this damage. Certain dietary proteins. Now, the most common ones, and you guys know the 5 big ones, when you're looking at gut health, food elimination is going to be a necessary component. So that can be the soy, it can be the casein and dairy, it can be gluten, it can be sugar, it can be corn. For a lot of us, it's also tomatoes, it can be onions, shellfish. These are things that can, the proteins in these foods are really hard for our bodies to digest for some of us, and then those dietary proteins can cause more leaky gut. It can be from low hydrochloric acid. Now, why do you think it would be from low hydrochloric acid? How could that relate to leaky gut? For those of you who have not asked a question, this is a question for you. I think if you look at that, let's go back to the way our body processes and digests food. Once you start chewing your food, there's an enzyme called amylase, and amylase starts breaking down the food, starts breaking down the carbohydrates. As the food gets broken down, we swallow it into our stomach, and then it's the hydrochloric acid that actually, it's like the oven. That's where the food goes and actually gets digested. So it goes into the oven, it starts getting digested, you start breaking down those proteins. Your body can actually absorb those in the small intestine once it enters that area. But most of us in America, we're eating this diet that does not support enzymatic production. We're not eating enough live foods. And so what happens is when we swallow the food, it hits our hydrochloric acid. That's not there. We don't have enough of it. And unfortunately for most Americans who are actually have acid reflux, they're taking Tums or some sort of like omeprazole, a proton pump inhibitor, and then their hydrochloric acid gets really suppressed, and then the food putrefies. And so the food hits the small intestine and those proteins aren't digested. And then what happens is you've got this kind of rotting food in your small intestine, and that's one of the ways that you get leaky gut. Then you have infections that grow over it. Antibiotics can be a big trigger of leaky gut. Like I said, infections, and that can be anything from eating food that's been contaminated to catching a cold to taking antibiotics and having an overgrowth of certain bacteria. If you're taking antibiotics for a surgery or something, blood sugar issues can cause leaky gut. Antibodies, if your body's attacking itself, those antibodies can cause it. Pregnancy is a big cause of leaky gut because your intestine just can't move. A lot of times there's just not enough space there. Stress can be a big part of it, menopause, toxicity, food allergies. And then what happens is in these mucosal cells, this is in your intestines, it's 2 cell layers thick. And if you look at some of the work done by Amy Meyer, she writes a lot about leaky gut. But what she says is that even if you have a food reaction to something like casein or gluten, if you are introduced to it like every 3 months, you're not going to heal. Your body will continue to remain, your gut will continue to be permeable. And so you'll have these undigested food particles that leak through. So you can see in this image here, the normal tight junction. This tight gap junction is important because only specific nutrients can leak through and get into the blood supply. When you have inflammation, those tight gap junctions open up too wide, and then undigested food particles and bacteria can leak through. And then once it leaks through, it gets into the blood and it goes system-wide. And then your immune system sees that there is this undigested food particle, and it triggers a massive immune response. So your body's immune system, not only does it circulate around the intestines and cause more inflammation in the intestines, but it starts circulating first and foremost all the organs and glands. That's a protective mechanism. One of the very first organs that your immune system stops at is the thyroid. So the majority of thyroid conditions in our country are not from a thyroid, not from the thyroid tissue itself, but it's actually a problem in the gut. And so what happens is your body, suddenly you get leaky gut, you're going to have leaky brain, your blood-brain barrier will be too suspended and too open, and then you can have infections that get into the brain, and that's where you have a lot of symptoms of brain fog. The other barrier is your lung barrier. So the respiratory barrier becomes leaky, and then once again you get infections, specifically yeast, that can traverse and migrate into the lung tissue itself. And then obviously that's going to cause a lot of inflammation, a lot of autoimmunity, malabsorption, nutritional deficiencies will be prevalent as well. So leaky gut's a big thing. How do you test for leaky gut? Well, you can do a urine test and look at lipopolysaccharides. That's one way, or you can look at zonulin. Now on Genova, they've just finally added a Genova lab with zonulin And so the zonulin marker is actually it's a $30 upgrade if you're a patient. That insurance won't pay for zonulin, unfortunately. But once again, it's a very predictive marker. If you've got zonulin that is secreted, zonulin is one of the proteins that keeps the gut barrier tight. It's kind of like the control guard that helps relax or contract those tight gap junctions. And so when zonulin is present, then that means it's working extra hard and your body's producing extra to try and keep those tight gap junctions in place. The lipopolysaccharides is actually well, it's a fat and a sugar that actually rides on the back of a bacteria. So when pathogenic bacteria, when they start to die off, the lipopolysaccharides is what kind of migrates out of the intestinal wall, and then the lipopolysaccharides get into the bloodstream, and they start causing a lot of inflammatory reactions. They can elevate cholesterol levels. Our bodies really can't utilize these lipopolysaccharides, but once again, they are a byproduct of pathogenic bacteria death, and when they're elevated in the blood, that's a problem. That's when your body goes into autoimmunity. We talked about some of the pro-inflammatory foods that can cause leaky gut. One thing I did not mention is eggs and peanuts. Eggs and peanuts depends on the person. Eggs are a great source of protein, very very inexpensive as far as proteins go, but a lot of us are reacting to eggs. And I grew up, or not grew up, but I went to school in Hawaii and lived on a chicken farm for 4 years, and so I had access to free eggs, and it was a conventional farm. It was a big production, and we fixed up this old coffee shack, and of course I was dead broke, and so doing everything as inexpensively as possible, which I'm so grateful of now. But what happened is I was probably eating about 6 to 12 eggs every day, half a dozen to a dozen, depending on the day, because it was free food. And I developed a very severe reaction to eggs, ended up triggering a lot of autoimmunity, kind of sent me into more of a Hashimoto's flare-up, psoriasis. Part of it was coupled with the Roundup that I was exposed to as a kid, because even as a kid I struggled with exercise-induced asthma. I had some autoimmunity with my psoriasis flaring up then, but it wasn't until I just ate way too many eggs that I finally started getting thyroid problems. So it's rough. Now I can maybe tolerate about 2 eggs a week. Otherwise I start to get some brain fog with it, so that leaky gut that's causing blood-brain barrier leakiness. Peanuts, a lot of aflatoxins in peanuts just feed candida and infections. And I won't spend too much more time on peanuts, but wouldn't recommend any peanuts if you're trying to get rid of inflammation. You guys know about soy, corn, dairy, gluten. I won't get too much into those. So let's talk a little bit about fecal matter transplant. And fecal matter transplant. Now, Kate, are you all set up to do this still? The fecal matter transplant? Or are we going to do that little at the next seminar? Or are you gonna?
Yeah, I got the blender ready. I guess I just got to find the good donor.
That's going to be key.
Yeah.
Your kids are going to be best because they haven't had any vaccines, or they have not. They're healthy. So, what do you think?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's go for it. Yeah, I
Okay,
think
so
it'll be a great demonstration for everybody.
they would love the demonstration, but let's talk about the risks. With fecal matter transplant, a lot of us, early on, a couple of years ago, we thought, here we go, we've got this study with fecal matter transplant, and several studies actually, but what we started to find, and one reason the FDA, they jumped in, because a couple of years ago a lot of naturopathic doctors started using fecal matter transplant in their practices, getting great results. And for those of you who work with really tough digestive cases, and you see one person, and I've seen dozens, they go and get the fecal matter transplant and they come back and it's life-changing for them. That's when you're like, well, we just need to do this on everybody. And then you start thinking of other applications. But the big risk for fecal matter transplant is if genetically there's not a match, sometimes that can trigger a little bit of an immune reaction, so you can actually induce some leaky gut by it. The other issue that you can have is that if a person's bacteria, remember, you're implanting a genetic imprint of species, because the bacteria that you're doing the fecal matter transplant with, that's going to die, but then what's going to happen is a whole new colonies are going to start forming. And depending on how those colonies form, depending on how their genetics match up with your genetics, that's going to influence the outcome. And so, yeah, interesting thing is if if you look at two twins and you look at one twin who, even if they're identical twins, they can still have differences in their genetic diversity and what it shows. So, even if you do family line, it's not always safe. So let's talk about the one of the early studies that some of you have heard me reference, but they took mice and they said, okay, in our control group, we're going to just have this normal microbiota development, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take the another group and disrupt their microbiota by giving them a low dose of penicillin. So they took a group of mice, and the control group just said, all right, we're going to help them grow healthy microbiota, and then we're going to take the disrupted group and give them penicillin. So it essentially wipes out all the bacteria early in their life. So this is like day 5 in the mice's life, I believe. And what happened is so sure enough, there's the loss of the early life protective bacteria, and the researchers wanted to see, well, does the bacteria influence obesity? And sure enough, they found that the mice that had very poor bacteria, they became obese. Now, if you think about that, if we, even the discussion we've had today, if you think about the bacteria having low diversity, remember the bacteria are what ferments the undigestible carbohydrates, so that's what feeds the bacteria, and then you get actually vitamins and minerals that the bacteria make for you based on those resistant starches, essentially. And then those resistant starches, as you get vitamins and minerals, then your body actually, your metabolism revs up. You don't store as much fat. But if you don't have that going on, then you're more prone to have more inflammation, which can cause obesity. But then what happened is this disrupted microbiota. They wanted to see, well, if we took these obese mice and we took the bacteria from these obese mice and transferred they took 2 groups. They said, yeah, we're going to transfer the bacteria we're going to take the microbiota transfer from the germ-free mice, and what we're going to do is we're going to transfer that into the obese mice and see what happens. And then we're going to take the fecal matter from the skinny mice, essentially, and put it into the obese mice and see what happens. And the end result in this study, and it was repeated at multiple universities, I believe Duke University ran this, but the end result was that the fat mice became skinny, skinny mice became fat. I mean, that was a big breakthrough. So, so let's talk about this. So if that can influence obesity, then we've got to start putting together a systematic way of restoring the gut. And so many of you have heard of the 4 R's, and in your Kajabi, we're always refining our protocols and putting new things that we're discovering in there from our Google Drive. But some of these are, first thing you have to do with gut health is you got to remove. So get rid of the pathogenic microflora, the fungus, the parasites, and that's where when I tell a patient, like, yeah, we can start by removing things and put you on a cleanse, but if we don't know what we are removing in the first place, we're going to have problems. So we need to remove the foods, the environmental stressors, any kind of psychological stress. We want to look at an oglio-antigenic elimination diet, so making sure they're off certain carbohydrates that are going to flare them up. You can use some botanical antimicrobials, or get them on some type of phytonutrients. Antibiotics and antifungals might be important in the beginning. Like if they have, like I said, if they have C. diff, then you may want to refer them out to get some type of fecal matter transplant. Or if they've got like a massive overgrowth of Klebsiella, then maybe antibiotics is important there. But you guys are brilliant in your protocol, so use what you can. Couple things we use: the Gentiana V statin, especially if they've got bacterial overgrowth or yeast, which usually comes with it. Occasionally, the die-off symptoms can be pretty moderate to severe. I feel like we push them too hard. So just watch for these. The other thing you can use when there's multiple, when there's kind of co-infections, that's where GI synergy is really important, because GI synergy is from Apex Energetics. That is a formula that's designed to treat bacteria, parasites, yeast. So that's where you do a pack a day, twice a day for 2 weeks. You may want to add in herbal ABX, do a couple bottles of that. They want to make sure they're staying hydrated, mineral water, get rest. They're going to have some sugar cravings the first 3 days, so put some duct tape over their mouth so they don't eat it. Tie their hands, because they need to avoid these for at least 8 weeks. And ideally, you just tell them 8 weeks, but it's like for the rest of their life. Mainly vegetables and protein, lots of garlic, live culture, bubby, sauerkraut, pickles, kombucha. If they do have yeast, then I would not recommend adding in sauerkraut or kombucha, or maybe pickles, but be careful with those things. Kimchi, once again, is another good live culture. If they have yeast overgrowth, take a couple of weeks and get rid of the yeast. So use the Saccharomyces boulardii. That's a pro-yeast. It's not a bacteria. It's a yeast, and that is a great way of populating the healthy yeast cultures. Gut Flora is a great formula. It's got oregano in it. It's made by Standard Process. That weeds out the fungus and dysbiosis. We like Ultraflora, use one of the Ultraflora formulas based on what's showing up in the patient's presentation. That will seed the good, healthy gut bacteria, making sure they're getting rid of GMOs, MSG, foods containing mycotoxins. And I'm telling you, even at the nice restaurants, they're putting MSG on everything. So you got to be very careful with MSG. One of my friends owns this 5-star restaurant here in Park City, and I was reading like the Chef magazine, and it was an argument about why MSG is so flavorful and adds so much to the food. So yeah, very interesting. All right, gut health. We got to replace what needs to be replaced. Especially if you're removing it, now replace it with good things. So gluten flam is, once again, that helps with those brush border enzymes. It's an Apex product. It's great if your patients ever feel like they're eating something that may be triggering them and you can't quite put your finger on it. Try the gluten flam. Or if you go out and you want to have some sourdough bread, try some gluten flam. It's got great enzymes in there to calm down the inflammatory reaction. Betaine hydrochloride. We all know what that is. You can use apple cider vinegar in its place if you like. Use the Bragg's. It's got to have the mother in it. GI care, that can help with some of replacing some of those enzymes in the stomach, or GI tonic, depending on how the person's stool is. If they're very weak, blood deficient, GI tonic for sure. And then get some resistant starch. Natural Stacks makes a great resistant starch with some plantains. They got the potato starch in there as well, and tapioca. One other one that I'm missing, I can't think of it right now, but they make a good prebiotic. Add some glutamine. Our body loves glutamine. We use a lot of Reparavites from Apex as well. So think about the digestive enzymes, intrinsic secretions, and then fiber to help support transit and just the general function. So, all right, now we'll talk about reinoculation, because you got to get those critters built up. So that can be making sure that they've got enough prebiotics, probiotics, the symbiotics, um, thinking about different strains that they may need, some of the basic strains, obviously the bifidobacteria strains, the lactobacillus, the Saccharomyces boulardii for the yeast, inulin or the fructooligosaccharides, soy fiber, those can be different soluble fibers. I don't like too much soy fiber, but in some products it's in there and seems to be okay. I like, once again, Metagenics. They're more specific. Prescript Assist is one of my favorite ways to reinoculate the gut. Nam brought that up earlier. It's more, like I said, it's more broad spectrum, covers all your different bases, and then the sauerkraut, pickles, and kimchi. Once again, and then if you're looking to repair the lining, which you have to repair it, nutrients you're going to need is the glutamine, the arginine, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin C, the zinc, phosphatidylcholine is another really good formula to support the mucosal lining, especially if somebody has adrenal issues. That helps coat the colon lining, calms down the immune system. You want to support the gall function with lactoferrin. The whey has been one of those, one of the, it's part of your dairy proteins, but whey can be very supportive. One of the best things that we like is, and I don't believe it's on here, but it's colostrum. Using colostrum has been one of the most scientifically proven ways to repair the intestinal linings. Great for leaky gut. You want to make sure that you're getting antioxidants, the pantothenic acid, vitamin E, the carotenoids, curcumin, all your fatty acids are going to be really important as well. Rebalancing it, making sure they're scheduling relaxation, they're doing mindful eating, they've got heart rate variability and biofeedback, they're doing yoga, prayer, breathing, meditation, and then psychotherapy. And at the very end, if you can't rebalance it, then a frontal lobotomy seems to work pretty well. Next week, I believe, I'd like to talk about SIBO a little more. We didn't jump into that at all today. And our time has ran up. So next week I want to talk about that. But the other way to increase your gut health is gargling, gag reflexes, coffee enemas, Kegel holds, Qigong. So yeah, just some great things that we just don't have time to get into. But really appreciate all of you being on this. Cade, do you have any last words that you'd like to share with everybody? I know, get out to our upcoming events and get in touch with us. A lot of you, we want to hear how you're doing, how your practice is going, and how we can support you. So,
yeah, awesome webinar. Can you email me these last few protocol slides, just like those last 4 or 5, and I'm going to get those on the protocol tab in Kajabi as well. So all you clients out there, you'll have full access to this. I think it's in there now, but it's probably mixed with a bunch of other slides. So just those specifically.
That sounds good. And then if you can jump on the, we have updated recently the Google Drive too. So if you want to convert that over, that'd be helpful as well. I'll send this over.
Perfect.
All right.
Awesome.
Take care, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.